I keep seeing the same basic question pop up in the comments again and again. So, if this is the little season and everything is wicked, how are we supposed to function in the modern world and still serve God? Well, we can't, at least not in the way they mean. These people are asking how they can have their cake and eat it too, but it doesn't work that way in spite of what the church tells us. To be honest, the same principles apply to any time in history. The problem with the little season is that not only are all of man's institutions run by satanic forces from the top down, they also control almost every aspect of our modern lives, seemingly impossible to avoid. And the least considered aspect of this deception are the tools that we rely on every single day. My previous videos show ways to identify and avoid the wicked aspects of our government, education, and financial systems, but in this one I want to tackle technology in all its forms: mechanical, chemical, digital, spiritual, and financial. I read a lot of sermons, Christian blogs, even secular journals on the topic, and they all seem to agree that technology is not good or evil, it's neutral. It's how we use it that matters. But I don't think it's that simple. Another way to look at it is either it glorifies God or it doesn't. By that I mean it allows us to live in the manner that He intended for us. I look around and I see technology glorifying us, not the Father. Think about it from His perspective. He created us in the world we live in to coexist in perfect harmony. Since there's nothing He can't do, if He wanted technology, He would have given it to us. If He wanted us to travel quickly, He would have designed us with jetpacks built into our backs. If He wanted us to have impersonal communication over vast distances, He would have given us telepathy. I don't know anyone who thinks the future is going to be better than the past, even with all this technology. And although this is mostly referring to corruption, what do you think powers that corruption? A wicked financial system manipulating the souls of those who unleash tyrannical military forces controlling the rest of us through digital devices. It's all technology, and we finally hit the wall where the negatives outweigh the benefits. We need to look no further than our own pockets to find the latest idol people worship today: the phone. Take it out and look at it if you aren't already. Then look at the natural landscape and creatures the Father placed upon it. Do you see any similarities at all? We were created in a very specific way, and that is to interact with each other face to face. There is a life force that God uses to connect all of us. AI will never possess it. And without face-to-face contact, our interactions with each other aren't inspired because we've excluded God from the element. And yes, I do see the hypocrisy of using an internet platform to discuss views against technology. I'll even concede that my first career right out of college was engineering, helping to build the things that disconnect us from His reach. It is nearly impossible to understand God when every second of our day is consumed with the routines and inventions of man, especially since they're all inspired by money worship, pride, and vanity. Gotta make them big bucks and dress to impress, keep up with the Joneses. Did He design a world where we would be startled awake every morning with loud electronic beeps followed by chugging 16 ounces of black goo so we have the artificial energy needed to rush to a career where we dedicate the majority of our waking existence to Satan's institutions, making us too spiritually defeated and tired at night to focus the time and energy on our families that they deserve, so we tune completely out of God's world and into Satan's programming in the form of entertainment? Absolutely not. In the scenario just described, there is no connection with God at all. Just interactions with the elements that define this little season of Satan. And why? Because of technology. At no time does the average person interact with the world God created, and because of that, we don't have the experiences that He intended. And the specific technology we have is actually designed for us to serve the sins mentioned above. Money worship, pride, and vanity. To serve Satan's system. But is all technology bad? And if not, is it more a matter of how it's used? It's difficult to compare current technology to what we had in the past. Enoch is our best pre-flood guide showing the wickedness of fallen angels introducing metalworking technology and vanity through the use of makeup. The only physical remnants of the previous age we have are megalithic stone structures. The flood washed everything else away. Pyramids aren't mentioned in the Bible, even though the Old Testament spends time in Egypt. Makes me wonder if advanced technology is just so common that they didn't mention it, or if it was just an ancient relic from Enoch's time. Of course, it could also be that the named locations today aren't the same as the biblical ones, which makes sense as they don't match geographically. I looked and I couldn't find any passages in the Bible that celebrate invention. There are many examples of divine craftsmanship like Noah's Ark, Solomon's Temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and others. None of those examples are celebrating invention as much as the effort put into their construction. The Bible doesn't outright condemn invention when discussing Tubal-Cain, But we know how Cain's descendants turned out. It's clear about the Tower of Babel with the fired bricks and the bitumen mortar, but that was less about technology and more about how it was used, trying to attain godlike status. But isn't that what so much of our technology is today? Like AI, various medical innovations, and certainly the financial inventions that give certain people immense power over the rest, it's attempting to attain godlike status. But at the same time, God created us to be inventive creatures. We write books and songs, create art, invent better ways of doing things using the tools he gave us. David was a musician, but it was his music, not the invention of the instrument, that the Father celebrated. All forms of invention except technological creation are apparently recognized. Is it because the others are forms of expression? Some would argue technological invention is also a form of expression. And if the pen is mightier than the sword, then it should be fine. But I couldn't find any reference in the Bible that agrees. I just read an amazing article on Bible Unbound's Substack about AI and its gateway to witchcraft. He connects technology to magic in a way that makes a lot of sense to me. They both make tasks easier, but when we do that, we are not living in the spirit of the world God created for us. Think about the magicians at the king's court in Exodus. They existed to provide effortless power void of personal interaction. Technology, like magic, makes us rely on ourselves when we should be putting our trust in God and others. The article references a book, The Life We're Looking For, by Andy Crouch. In it, he cites the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, "You cannot serve both God and mammon." That's an Aramaic word that means not only money, but the wickedness that embodies it. Money by itself is a useful invention that doesn't take us away from the ideals of the world God created for us. It creates a system for exchanging goods and services between consenting parties. But that's not what mammon means here. It's referring to the impersonal and effortless power it creates. It's magic. And money today is so much worse than biblical money as it's just printed out of thin air. Voila, effortless power. Especially when the person with the money never earned it by providing their fellow man with a good or service. Oppression doesn't count. Well, the same applies to anything that creates effortless power. The Bible doesn't celebrate invention primarily for the same reason it doesn't celebrate magic. It's witchcraft. And there are so many other technologies that create effortless power, like modern transportation, computers, and the internet. Talk about impersonal. We literally don't need to leave the house to interact with other people anymore. And relationships are probably the greatest metric used to judge us in God's eyes. It's unbelievably obvious as we look around, especially for those of us born prior to 2000 who have seen massive physical, social, financial, and political changes in the world around us. Yes, we have access to a wealth of information right at our fingertips, luxurious climate-controlled environments to live in, and the ability to travel almost anywhere we want in a matter of hours. But we're also not only physically unhealthy, so many of us suffer from anxiety, depression, and just about every other spiritually depleting ailment imaginable, and at dramatically increasing rates with each passing year. And one of those afflictions affects nearly all of us, and that's addiction. I'm not talking about substance abuse, I'm talking about addiction to technology. We don't want to admit it, but we are addicted to so many things that I'm sure the Father did not intend for us to have. The only way to verify this addiction would be to disappear in the woods for a week or two with no possessions to see how we handle it. And probably not well. And most of us don't even realize it. We're blissfully unaware because we grew up around it. Computers, televisions, and in some cases cell phones were already in our houses before we were born. And I don't think it's too far into the future before we start seeing the effects of this addiction. We are dependent upon these earthly inventions, and when they disappear, so does every last fragment of our society. Whether we have a catastrophic supernatural event, another Great Depression, or simply the powers that be deciding to cut our power, it won't be like the 1930s where people were mostly self-sufficient. We will devolve into chaos because we are incapable of functioning without technology, like an alcoholic without a drink. Complete social collapse is inevitable. I don't think much needs to be said about the mechanically and chemically powered monstrosities that fill up our roads and airways today. We're all aware of the ever-increasing death toll and destruction necessary for this evil to exist, but that's not what we're discussing here. In a previous video, several commenters mentioned most Amish don't own vehicles because it causes their communities to break up. My first thought on that was, what do those xenophobes know? Wouldn't cars actually bring people together? It's a bridge for communities to connect. But the more I thought about it, the more I agreed with their position. Look at our society as an example. Much more prevalent here in America than anywhere else in the world. Children are statistically better off in multi-generational environments. Yet we still move away from our families after we finish school because of transportation technology and rarely see our families except on holidays, even though we still possess the same witchcraft to appear anywhere overnight that we used to leave in the first place. They're right, the community is destroyed. We need to understand that the Father could have created the world any way He wanted. He could have easily given us the ability to travel vast distances quickly, but He didn't. He clearly wanted multi-generational communities, and taking a look at the sinful world around us, it's easy to see why. I've already covered how most of us don't do the work the Lord specifies in the Bible. A lot of us do, but most don't. Most of us work in one of Satan's 5 institutions of wickedness and literally dedicate our lives to his service. They get their hooks into us early and create debt slaves, so at the very least, even if we actually do contribute to humanity, it doesn't matter because we still have to work too many hours just to keep our heads above water, leaving very little time for family, friends, and genuine social interaction. We become dependent on the system because we're born to develop technology and dedicate our lives to dollar worship. By living the life most of us currently live, we are serving Satan because we are serving the systems that take us away from God by design. We aren't supposed to be devoting our souls to corporations. We are supposed to be providing goods and services to our fellow man. And what has all this technology gotten us? Are our lives easier? Heck no, many people under 40 with full-time jobs are barely able to make rent, much less a mortgage. In fact, many people work 60 or more hours a week and can barely afford rent. We've been lied to about technology over and over again. In 1930, world-famous economist John Maynard Keynes, known for promoting the debt-based economy that has driven the wealth gap and destroyed the finances of the next 4 generations at least, if we even make it that far, predicted that technology would by 2030 have people only working 15 hours a week. The same lie was spread by mainstream media when computers were introduced, and here we are working more hours, and now they push it again with AI. This is not how the Father intended for us to live, but how can we complain? We're slaves. I found some writings on the work life of English peasants prior to the Industrial Revolution, which could be from the Millennial Reign in my opinion, where it's declared that there were periods where they only had to work 150 days a year. Some sources citing only 120 days. In addition, the workday was more akin to the human condition. Take this excerpt from James Pilkington on the topic. I'm going to summarize, but this is great. It says the laborers enjoy a slow morning and arrive at work late in the day and then eat breakfast. They work a bit after that before taking a long lunch that includes a nap. After that, they work a little more before they start drinking and then finish up the day shortly after that. And they still had land and a home. This isn't mine. It's from @TNTJohn1717 on X. But it captures everything I want to say, and it's beautifully written. Most Christians today walk around with a spiritual blindfold on, never suspecting that the brightest screen in their house may be the darkest doorway into their soul. The devil doesn't need to drag you into the wilderness anymore. He just needs to get your thumb scrolling. The temptation of Christ was 3 attacks aimed at identity, authority, and worship. Digital temptation hits the same 3 points, only now it's personalized, curated, and delivered in high definition right into your pocket. The tragedy is that believers think technology is neutral simply because it doesn't have horns growing out of it. That's how spiritually dull this generation has become. If Satan used stones in the desert, why would he hesitate to use screens in your home? The devil has always adapted his bait to the age he's fishing in. In the 19th century, it was rationalism. In the 20th, entertainment. In the 21st, it's the algorithm, an altar built to your flesh that promises you everything except holiness. You can tell a man's spiritual temperature by how uncomfortable he gets when you touch his devices. Mention the word idolatry and suddenly every Christian becomes a theologian of convenience. The truth is simple. When the screen speaks louder than the scripture, you're already halfway demon-led and don't even know it. Nobody bows to a statue anymore. They bow to a feed. Nobody kisses a golden calf anymore. They kiss the glow of the notifications that keep them enslaved. And here's the uncomfortable punchline. The devil doesn't need you to worship him directly. He only needs you distracted, divided, and drained. If he can keep you from prayer, he's already halfway to victory. If he can keep you from discernment, he's nearly finished the job. And if he can keep your eyes glued to a digital world while your Bible collects dust, he won't even need temptation. You'll defeat yourself. It's not about technology, it's about the battlefield for your soul. And that's all that needs to be said about that. I've already touched on this earlier, but I want to add that money today is not the same as money in the Bible. In fact, money today, by all rights, should have a different name because it does not function at all like it did in biblical times. Money in the Bible was representative of labor and used in exchange for equal labor in the form of goods and services. Money today is completely controlled by a small group of people who manipulate the quantity and distribution of every dollar printed. The Father did not want a class of people immune to working, and what we have is a poor majority doing all the work of the rich minority. And money today isn't even money. It's not backed by anything except debt. And because money will always be tied to that debt, and no government has any intention of ever paying it back, they have to keep refinancing that debt, which leads to inflation. It's a vicious circle that benefits the billionaires at the expense of the rest of us, those who actually work. And even though our money has been tied to debt and working against us since 1913, that's not even our biggest problem. We used to have the capability to invest, even fairly recently, which didn't make us any money if we stayed in the indexes, but at least allowed us to keep up with inflation. So our money didn't just rot away sitting in a bank or jar buried in our backyards. Now there's not a single asset with growth potential sitting at a less than 50 times price to earnings ratio. And those companies no longer deal in goods and services. I've already covered the Nvidia fraud in a previous video, and even Apple used to be a reputable hardware manufacturer. But that's not how they make most of their money anymore. They are a financial institution now, investing in buybacks instead of R&D. So even if you supported technology, there's no way to invest in it, making money even more useless to us and definitely not what it's designed for. The future of finance is frightening, and that's if even somehow the economy is saved, which is mathematically impossible. Look at Kalshi, the new darling of the financial world. Just a prediction market app, but it's essentially a deregulated gambling platform. They have VCs jumping down their throat because they're going to bring the tokenization of everything, including our personal data, to the investing world. That is the latest and final trend of our economic system, generating revenue without producing goods or services that of course always translate to debt, and in this case privacy exploits. They found loopholes to avoid what few state and federal laws exist against gambling to allow us to destroy ourselves financially while boosting their bottom line. Several states have taken legal action against them, but only to appease other gambling interests. Having a bad day and want to blow off some steam? Whip out your phone and go double or nothing on your student loan debt. It's indescribably wicked. And this is the future of our economy, as there is no longer a way to keep this ship afloat with genuine businesses, so literally 100% of the corporate economy will be fake. This is the final piece of the corruption before the Jenga tower comes tumbling down. This is an easy segue into computers and AI. I'm covering both at the same time because the difference is negligible at this point for two reasons. First, the article I mentioned earlier compared computers to magic because they can accomplish tasks that were designed by God to complete ourselves. We lose our ability to trust God and form meaningful relationships when we not only use but become dependent on technology. Computers more than anything else. With both technologies, we are essentially casting spells to complete our tasks. And second, AI in its current form is nothing more than predictive text algorithms. AGI is what people think of when they think of AI. That's certainly what the billionaire class thinks. Artificial general intelligence is what everyone believes is right around the corner, but it's not. To give you an idea, the jump from a simple Google search to ChatGPT is like walking a mile, while the jump from ChatGPT to AGI would be like flying from Tokyo to New York in 3 hours. They aren't even in the same ballpark. I keep reading over and over again that AI is satanic or demonic, but they're communicating this message from their phones. The biblical issues with it are that it's magic. Yes, but so are any other digital devices. It might be a slightly darker magic, but that's like a cokehead condemning crack. The greater danger for me with AI, just like any other online service, is the data collection. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said in an interview recently that all chats are stored and can be used against us someday. People share their deepest and darkest secrets with ChatGPT. And that gives legitimacy to the idea that the AI data centers are not simply to run the software, but exist as massive collection centers where they will create databases on every aspect of each of us for total authoritative control, as we can already see with the biometric digital IDs in China and parts of Europe. So AI is basically the digital version of Jeffrey Epstein, collecting data to use against us when they need it. To help keep NVIDIA stock artificially inflated and relevant, the news keeps teasing us with segments about how Trump is going to finally allow China to have access to their chips. What they don't tell you is that it's all a lie and they don't even want them. The AI China is developing, like DeepSeek, actually outperforms ChatGPT in almost every category, including accuracy. What they don't tell us is that it runs just fine locally on an old phone. That's right, we don't need super-fast GPUs to power AI software. So why do all these companies lie to us about the need for massive data centers? Complete and total authoritarianism through the implementation of biometric digital IDs. I guess I should also quickly mention those who run these tech giants. Even if we could somehow justify the technology itself, there's the problem of the Satanists running them. Of course, in this little season, they run everything, so it's no big surprise. But just for the sake of argument, let's see what they're all about. I've already discussed in my Pharmakia video that the CEOs of these companies admit to doing ketamine to try and connect with demons and see the future. And they all see the same thing, AI takeovers and destruction of humanity, which couldn't be more obvious as their ultimate goal. I mean, think about it. How much easier would it be to control a world of robot slaves than humans? They already have the mainstream media on their side, as always, but now the controlled opposition has jumped on board. And if you've ever been on the fence about Joe Rogan, he just closed that door by admitting he thinks Jesus will return in the form of AI.
Even if Jesus was a physical person in the past, you don't think that he could return as artificial intelligence?
You're probably wondering why I'm bringing up Tolkien. Well, it's because he's the mainstream embodiment of the rejection of technology. Not only his work, but also his letters and interviews leave no doubt that he loves the world that God created for us, the motivation behind it, and despises the wickedness that seeks to destroy it. It's no coincidence that he's also a devout Christian. He had two passions in life, his relationship with Christ and his love of fantasy fiction. As slaves from birth, it can be difficult to see through the veil of satanic influence that we live under. There's a reason his books mean so much to so many people, and the main reason is that Middle-earth is a perfect representation of the world we're supposed to live in. The world the Father created for us. It's no secret Tolkien despised automobiles, toxic air and water, machines of war, and the destruction of all things that God said were good. And his ability to recognize and separate good from evil in spite of mainstream narrative is what makes him such a popular truther. I've read the posts on social media about Tolkien being a Satanist with an accusation that he was a silent member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn with no evidence whatsoever. They say a one-time member of his writing group, the Inklings, a club dedicated to the love of great literature, was also in the Golden Dawn. That's it. He met a Hermetic once, so clearly he's a Satanist. I've read this and other unfounded theories all over every corner of social media. It's clearly a psyop, all that effort to discredit his faith with no evidence. And my guess is it's because they don't want Christians to think that someone who so adamantly rejects technology is to be trusted. And he doesn't just hate technology, he also despises democracy, the illusion that we have some political control in our lives. If he was wicked, he would be celebrating both technology and democracy just like every Satanist running the world today. It's clear in both his writings and letters that he despised people who strive for political office because they're predisposed to perform evil deeds. And he's right, 100% of all politicians are proven to be opportunists, and that's just the good ones. He also hated the patriotism these politicians stir up, as it takes God from our hearts and replaces it with genocidal thoughts, and not for good reason, but simply to provide wealth and power to the elect. He knew and was quite vocal about the fact that they're all controlled by the banks and aren't to be trusted. Tolkien preferred the biblical approach, which is that kings are far less likely to be corrupt as they have no one to answer to except God himself. In the Bible, there were even some kings appointed by God. Our system today could never allow for that, and even if one righteous person was able to navigate their way to power, they would be outnumbered, so it wouldn't even matter. He never outright used the word, but it's clear in his letters and interviews that he knew political leaders and those who control them are satanic. Tolkien's hatred of allegory is well known, and I should clarify that when he refers to the allegory he objects to, it's a one-to-one match or a correlation between a real-world person and the character in a story. For example, his good friend C.S. Lewis, who became a Christian late in life due to constant pressure from Tolkien, wrote his main character from his Narnia novels, Aslan, essentially as Jesus. Tolkien took issue with this as he found such allegory in any work to be offensive and insulting to the reader. Aragorn is not Christ, but he is the rightful king. Gandalf is not the king, but he uses his power and wit to allow righteousness to prevail. The morals and teachings of Jesus are there, but separated into many characters. Frodo and Sam are based on David taking on a large evil power in spite of their size, but all of them are more than that and less than that. For example, Frodo is willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for his friends, so in that sense he's kind of based on Jesus. The final act of Lord of the Rings, the end of the Third Age, is clearly inspired by tribulation. The Fourth Age, shown in his unfinished work The New Shadow, picks up after the millennial reign and is clearly based on the Little Season. And this hatred of allegory is why you have so many people who have found Christ through Tolkien's books. It makes it more real when you see his teachings through narrative. There are many ways people become Christians. There are those who are lucky enough to be born into families that teach Scripture from birth. Then there are some who find faith on their own because their hearts are in a state to receive the Lord. Then others, like myself, who used to have hardened hearts and required years of study, especially in the concentrations of philosophy and science, to find faith. As I mentioned in a previous video, I even have 2 friends who found God through their use of psychedelic substances. It allowed them to see the truth behind our reality and appreciate his creation as well as his heart. Then there are others who need a more literary, intellectual approach, and this is where Tolkien comes in. Some people are very turned off by the traditional academic structure of modern Christianity. They don't object to the message, they dislike the format. Because of his non-allegorical approach to writing, the teachings of Christ are experienced to some extent instead of being described. I'm sure you've heard the expression show, don't tell when writing. Well, Tolkien did that, and many people love the morality of the stories, which has led them ultimately to Christ. The connection between Christianity, living as God intended, and a distaste for the wicked institutions and things that take us away from him are what he represented. And hopefully anyone watching this video does too. So the reason I bring up Tolkien is because Middle-earth life in the good days is representative of how we should be living under the Father. Now look around at our world today, and what do we see? I scoured the Bible looking for justification on living life the way we do today and could only find one passage. Daniel 12:4 speaks of these times and how knowledge will increase in the end. It's a stretch, but what can that possibly mean now at this historical height of human deception? Where is to and what is fro? Could that be us running around in cars and planes? It could mean that for the majority of the little season we've been completely oblivious to the realities of the world, but now we have the internet, which, although heavily regulated, allows those of us with a pure heart to seek out truth. We represent such a small percentage of the population, however. Can that one passage be referring to the few of us connecting together through the internet? It would seem more likely that it would be something more supernatural, but who knows? If it is true, though, maybe we as truthers on social media spreading the word are a small part of that. Are we using this technology to make our lives easier or simply as a tool to spread the word? If not for this one passage, I would have already dropped out of society. It still doesn't sit right, and I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to keep living this life before I grab my family and disappear into the woods, although my wife may have something to say about that. The era of good technology has passed, if there ever was such a thing. The Industrial Revolution was culturally, spiritually, and economically devastating for the 99%, but somewhat decent society arose out of it in the 20th century, give or take a couple world wars. While there was most definitely still evil in the world, there were many good things starting to happen as well. People didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. The popularity of Christ was increasing, and while we had commercial flights, advanced weaponry, and other wickedness in our daily routines, we still found a way to have dinner together and bond as a family. And even outside our homes, we still had community. But we got complacent, and Satan's powers grew. His minions went to work and created even more technologies that destroyed our society, normalized debauchery, and stole our wealth while we were distracted. But it was inevitable as it had been written in Revelation. If they hadn't broken us mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, turning the vast majority of the current population into Satan worshippers, knowingly or otherwise, then the prophecy never could have been realized. And now here we are at its feet. We used to be fit and healthy, and that's when we should have fought back, before we were poisoned into submission. But as I already mentioned, what could we really have done? It was already written. The next step I already covered in my previous video, the end of Satan's little season, and it will involve replacing us with AI if and when they are able. We know the Luciferians have no regard for human life and only keep us around as their slave labor force. So we know what happens when we no longer serve a purpose for them. The vast majority of our economy is no longer about providing goods and services to people. It's about financializing everything without producing anything tangible or useful. It's about profit for the elite while putting everyone else in debilitating debt. Most jobs are just to appease a narrative, and our financial system has devolved into a system of investments with no more merit or value than NFTs. In addition, the equities and housing markets have been nationalized so that the assets of the wealthy are kept artificially high with our tax dollars and endless money printing. That's right, they use our own labor against us to steal our wealth while increasing theirs. That is our technological path until the end of days, whenever that is, and it might already be too late to unplug. There's no difference between technology and magic no matter how we twist it. They accomplish the same goals. And with each new advancement, we are driven further and further from the Father by the poisoning of our souls. God bless and stay well. We're going to need each other before we know it. I just want to say thank you to everybody who asked how they can help support this channel to increase the content. It really means a lot to hear that. But as of right now, I have no plans to start a membership or Patreon or whatever people do. To do that, I would have to quit my job or find a quicker way to make these videos. But I am considering a weekly live show that uses current events to gauge our proximity to the end. Wouldn't take much time either, since it wouldn't have to be edited. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in something like that. And if you'd rather see less of me, don't be shy about that either. But that said, I won't be doing this forever. I've come to the conclusion that participating in modern life is in contrast to my own personal goals as a Christian. I've been praying on it, researching it, and speaking with friends on the topic, and it couldn't be clearer what has to be done. The problem is it ironically takes considerable money to separate from Satan's system. There are certain underlying financial factors. Only slaves receive Social Security and Medicare, among other subsidies. And those who leave the shackles won't qualify anymore, which makes living expenses far higher later in life. But I really doubt we have that long anyway. And even if we did, what are the chances those services will still be offered? I estimate 2 to 3 more years of work and frugal living before I can get out. And since I'll be in the world and of it during that time anyway, I'll keep the YouTube channel up. Well, until they shut me down. They've already started deleting videos. Not sure exactly what's going to happen next. Probably start looking for a community of like-minded individuals and hope they'll have me. Not a commune or anything like that. They always fail. Just a nearby town with good folks. And if it doesn't exist, I might just have to set one up. Life is a test, but not the one we've been sold since birth. The goal of life is not he who dies with the most toys wins. It's not about ruthless competition and hoarding of resources. That life isn't even rewarding when you're winning. It's about seeing through the all-encompassing deception and sin that defines the modern world. But most people want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to hedge their bets by pretending to be Christians while enjoying the spoils of Satan's little season. And I get it, they're tempting. But that's because they're supposed to be. These same people are the ones who reject the idea that deception has any impact on our salvation, even though the Bible contradicts that thinking. Ezekiel 14:9 and Hosea 4:6 is what God thinks of those who allow themselves to be deceived. The people want to worship idols, so God lets them have their free will. If we participate in Satan's system today, then we have to deal with the consequences later. That is the reality of the modern world. We are the students. Satan is the proctor, and God has carefully crafted this current world to give us one final test. And you better believe it's a hard one. Just take a look around. There's literally nothing more spiritually obvious. Too many people see ignorance as a form of innocence. But again, the Bible warns us over and over that allowing ourselves to be deceived makes it difficult to find salvation. In Matthew 18:3, Jesus tells us to become like children. And yes, he's talking about innocence to some extent, but also showing that we must clear our minds of all the deception that we've been taught since birth to start our learning over again. Jeremiah 17:9 tells us that it's in our nature to lie to ourselves, so we have to be proactive in filtering out the deception, more now than ever. And when we put our hearts into a wicked world, the result is devastating. The Father knew this, but luckily gave us plenty of warnings. Isaiah 44:20 shows us how the things of this world are deceptive even when Satan doesn't have complete control. The New Testament follows this tradition. Matthew 24:4 and 5 talks about avoiding false messiahs, which seems easy enough, but in today's secular world, false messiahs are literally anyone or anything that promotes Satan's institutions. I know many of you don't like Paul, but he continues the biblical theme of avoiding the things of this world. Corinthians 6:9 and 10 tells us that culture isn't as innocent as advertised. Don't be deceived by it. This rings true today more than it did in the first century. 1 Corinthians 3:18 and 19 says the wisdom of this world is foolish in God's eyes. I really like this one because it puts things in perspective. We need empathy for the Father just as much as we are supposed to have for our fellow man. Look at the world through the Creator's eyes. He sees our hearts, our souls. The material things of this world couldn't matter less to him. The same applies to false ideologies. We can't waste our energy on them. Ephesians 5:6 tells us this, not to be consumed by worldly arguments. In Matthew 10:16, Jesus tells his followers to be as wise as the serpents, meaning that to live righteously, we have to know our enemies. To understand the deception so that we can avoid it, we have to be fully versed in it. And that education never stops since the enemy's tactics are constantly changing. Mainstream media and the pharmaceutical industry tells us that we need to be happy, and most people think that's the goal of life. Why? Because they want us medicated and deceived. But the reality is that true happiness comes from a relationship with the Father, and the only way to have that is through truth. Ignoring the evils of the world drives us away from Him. Many people have left the conspiracy theory world because it caused them severe depression, and I pray for their souls. Ignorance may be bliss now, but it's death later. Our lives are a test to see if we're able to defy deception, even when it's hard to see, like everything around us today. Why do you think Satan was loosed for this little season? What is God using him for? What has God always used him for? Think about that. His entire identity is deception. It's his fingerprint. And why our place in the biblical timeline is so apparent. If we are truly righteous, we will see through the deception and be in the world but not of it. But if we aren't, then we will indulge ourselves in Satan's spoils, which is currently every one of man's institutions and the products they produce. Nobody said it would be easy, which is why this test is so difficult. Atheists always like to ask why God lets bad things happen to good people. Well, he doesn't. He allows us to have free will. And when we turn a blind eye to the corruption, it continues to oppress the population. That's not God. That's us allowing wickedness to prevail by choice. And it's because we give our blessing and allegiance to man's institutions, which are the most obvious shrines to Satan. Having confidence or approval in any of these institutions is the same as worshiping a golden calf. The most important aspect of the little season is not about arguing over what parts of our history are true or not. It's about how that has created modern life. It's about being able to recognize that for the first time in history, every aspect of our world is riddled with deception and has unconditional control of every major aspect of our daily lives, from government, media, and education to religion, law, and money, in their entirety. How much more proof does anyone need? Those who can't see it are choosing not to see it. They love living in the world evil has provided for them. I see it every day. So many truthers say, yep, it's a little season. Well, business as usual. Or they say the eschatology doesn't matter, just your faith in Christ. Well, yes, to some extent. But this season is the hardest test of faith believers have ever faced, and the vast majority of people claiming to be Christians spend all day expressing their love and worship of this world by eagerly participating in everyday life. The season does matter because we have to be extra diligent. Way more so than at any other time in history. Truly understanding the teachings of Christ and applying them to the reality of the world around us is our purpose for being. Why else would the Father create a reality for us that is defined by good versus evil, if not to test us? I no longer believe that we are their descendants. I am certain that we are the rest of the dead, resurrected in waves. The Bible doesn't say that some of the rest of the dead are resurrected during the little season. It infers all of them. And that would be the vast majority of all people who ever lived. Now, it would take a considerable amount of time to resurrect, so to speak, that many people. Based on the qualifications to enter the millennial kingdom in the first resurrection, I'd estimate that well over 99% of the population missed out on that. It only included the Old Testament saints, the church-age believers, and the martyred tribulation believers. The rest of the dead is everyone else who's ever been born and were either too wicked, lost, or simply never heard the word of Christ. This time we're living in today is nothing more than the dead receiving a second chance, no matter how we got here. Answers in Genesis has broken it down across several articles and determined it's really based on the doubling of the birth rate, starting with 2 people. But they found that there could have easily been 4 billion people alive at the time of the flood due to the long lifespans. Easily. Add another billion that died before the flood, and that's 5 billion people born in roughly 1,500 years. And this is being very conservative, as Tom Pickett has calculated that it could have been as high as 40 billion. Then we start repopulating again with 8 people and have another roughly 2,500 years until Jesus. The pre-flood years were full of wickedness, but the post-flood years were defined by war. And war kills a lot of young men before they're old enough to have children. So now we have to assume an even more conservative birth rate, but with an extra 1,000 years, we could easily be looking at another 15 billion lives in that era. So let's say 20 billion people born total, up to and including Christ. But potentially as many as 55 billion. Now, most people who died during tribulation, the goats, are being held in hell waiting for the white throne judgment, so they would not be counted, nor would the sheep, but the widely accepted population is estimated to only be 300 million during Jesus' life. So they wouldn't make a staggering difference in the statistics anyway. This was followed by the millennial kingdom, and it makes sense that some of them would have been wicked, as those who were mortal and born at this time would all have free will. But it's also hard to imagine that it would be anything other than a small number of people considering the environment. The very fact that a small percentage of genetically similar people have controlled the world these past 200 years confirms that for me. That would put us at 20 billion lives lived by the start of the little season, very conservatively. A quick Google search estimates that 15 billion people have lived since 1776. We currently have a world population of 8 billion right now at a rate that doubles every 40 years, which is very high historically. If we get another few billion people in the next 5 years, that could be it for us. Everyone will have been reborn, and it would be time for Satan to march his army on the camp of the saints. That said, you have to assume a ludicrously low birth rate over the first 4,000 years, so we could still have decades or even centuries before we reach the end of the season. The main point is that the rest of the dead is such a massively large number that there's no way that they were all resurrected at once at the beginning of the little season. If that was the case, the population today would literally be in the quadrillions following the same formula. Now look at this population chart from Lambert Dolphin's website. What do you notice? Seems obvious that nearly everyone who lived before is being reborn in this little season. And we're reaching the point of matching it and thus concluding the prophecy. So being the rest of the dead, that means we've lived before, and whether through ignorance or immorality, it wasn't good in the eyes of the Lord. And in my experience, when given a second chance, the standards are always higher than the first time, which is why this test is so difficult. That white throne judgment is going to be a wake-up call for a lot of people. John 5:29 even refers to the rest of the dead at the white throne as the resurrection of judgment. Based on some of the comments from the last video, it appears my message must not have been clear, so I want to talk about deception in general, but also tie it with technology since it's an integral part of our time, and I wanted to add a few more things. This doesn't apply to most of us, but some of the responses to the technology video made it very obvious that people will not give up their idol worship, and the links they will go through to justify it are astonishing. To be fair, I didn't even provide the best biblical passage in that video. It was Ricardo from Contend for the Faith who showed me Ecclesiastes 7:29, which literally confirms that God has a plan for us and we scheme against him through invention. Which makes perfect sense, and I'll say it again, God created this world exactly the way he wanted. Modifying it for our own selfish desires is working against him. Technology is witchcraft, and Satan was guaranteed many generations of obedient followers once he was able to get his devices into our ancestors' hands. They were in our homes since before we were born, and we fail to see the wickedness because we're used to it. We suckled from the teat of invention. We think we have the intuition to differentiate between good and evil. That's just human nature. Technology is comfortable because it's all we've ever known. But intuition is where Christians fail. Proverbs 14:12 says that what seems right to us is the path to death. Deuteronomy 12:8 confirms this. We are deceived, which causes our sense of right and wrong to be screwed up. I studied philosophy a bit in college, and the thing that stood out to me was that even though the concept fails in every moral construct, everyone seems to have their own moral compass. If everyone has a different standard of good and evil, then society collapses as we're witnessing today. This existence has a clear creator who gave us a moral system that works perfectly in the world that he created, but only if everyone agrees. And I have to tell you, every single person I've ever met believes wholeheartedly that they can differentiate right from wrong based strictly on intuition. Proverbs 3:5 wisely tells us that we need to put 100% of our heart into the trust of the Lord and not our own knowledge because our experiences and education are warped. Satan uses our weaknesses against us. Think about tribal people who have never seen a car or a phone. They see it as witchcraft, and they're right. If we saw someone levitating something with a wand, it would appear magical to us. No different than a tribal person seeing a helicopter. Whether magic or invention, they both accomplish the same thing. So why do we see one as wicked and one as innocent? There are two reasons. One, we're used to it. We've had it since birth, so it seems normal. The other reason is addiction. We are addicted to technology. Just look at drug addicts. Most of us are no different. We see all of the technology around us completely differently because our addiction deceives us. It's no different than the junkies or alcoholics that can't see that they're destroying their lives and salvation. That said, we need to stop being deceived into thinking one form of technology is good and others are bad. This is just another divide and conquer strategy the elite are using against us, and we need to be able to recognize it. People condemn AI, then use the internet to do it. It's the same thing. It's an algorithm and some sloppy Photoshop, nothing more. There's literally AI in everything we do online. It's part of every operating system, every bloatware app we download. It manages every piece of text we type as well as most responses. It can't be avoided if we're using silicon. So to condemn it online is quite hypocritical unless we're also condemning computers and phones in the same breath. That's right, everyone watching this is using AI right now. But now we're at a point where if we put AI on a pedestal, or separate it from current technology, then we're helping Satan at his own game. This is why it bothers me when people say it's satanic, not because they don't understand the technology, but because they're helping push a narrative that the elites are trying to use to control and ultimately destroy us. AI is a grift, an illusion to at best keep our false economy afloat and at worst to end humanity. If people stop believing the lies put out about the technology, the handful of AI companies that make up most of the indexes collapse and take down the stock market with it. The satanic aspect of AI is not that it's more wicked than regular computing, it's that they believe it's something other than it is. This gives it credibility as something other than just another algorithm. Yes, it's witchcraft, but no more so than sending an email. Now, if we want to condemn what the elites want to accomplish with AI, then that's a different story. But as long as people believe the technology today is something more than an algorithm, they win. We're falling right into their trap of deception. We are in a massive economic crisis in which assets are artificially propped up to protect a financial system that enslaves us. They used a fake flu in 2020 as an excuse to print unprecedented amounts of money to devalue all of our savings and keep the illusion alive. They even had to shut down the government a few months ago to prevent even the false financial data from being released. It was that bad. But they can only rig the numbers so much, and now inflation is out of control while the economy is in ruins. And they claim that they only just started QE. It won't be long before we're jealous of Venezuela's wealth gap. Why do you think precious metals have recently doubled in price? At least until the Fed injected $150 billion to help HSBC, JP Morgan, and UBS cover their naked shorts. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but it's going to get so much worse. And now they're using AI. They will come up with something else next when this bubble pops, and it won't be good. That's not to say they don't want real AI or AGI, because it will allow them to replace us. But the technology as it stands is simply the next generation of predictive text and entry-level Photoshop. Besides hiding economic woes, another major reason for the deception is for the implementation of data centers.
So right now you have AI, ChatGPT, which doesn't really do anything, okay? It makes cool images. on your computer and helps you cheat in school. Okay, that's about it. Doesn't really do anything else. And if you don't go to school, then you're like, why am I using ChatGPT? Okay, and you're not going to pay a lot of money for it. So AI, it's a dead end. But at the same time, all around the world, everyone's spending billions, trillions of dollars on data centers, right? So everyone's putting money into AI. But then you're like, well, how do you make money off that? If you think the answer is for you to use AI, well, it's hard to make money off that. But if the answer is to create an AI surveillance state, that makes a lot more sense, right? So what is a surveillance state? Very easy, guys. We have it in China, okay? It's digital ID and digital currency. And the idea is that everything you buy, everything you do will be tracked. And so they can create a profile on you. This profile will tell the government who you are, how you behave, what you think. Not only that, the government can also manipulate how you think, how you behave. Okay?
In addition, look at ChatGPT's biggest competitor, DeepSeek. It's more accurate and can run locally on your phone. This is very important. AI doesn't even require data centers. And when we see the links they're willing to go through, from destroying the electric grid and water tables of every state, we should be scared. The AI RAM shortage is also fabricated to eventually get us onto 100% cloud computing. When you think about it, it doesn't even make sense. They've been building these data centers for years, and now all of a sudden, when the infrastructure is nearing completion, they suddenly require all the RAM? They simply don't want us to have the processing power to function off-grid. They want to control all information and store massive databases on each of us at their data centers. AI layoffs aren't even real. There are no positions that have been replaced with AI. It was an excuse to cut costs in a failing economy and at the same time push the narrative that AI is actual viable technology, capable of job replacement.
We need to explain what's happening, and part of that is debunking some myths around this. Now, I remember about a month ago, there was a whole wave of very scary headlines, including in a publication I really liked, the New York Post. Nick, maybe you can put this on the screen, claiming that AI was wreaking havoc on U.S. jobs. So this was a headline from the New York Post last month based on the October report from Challenger Gray, which basically tabulates announced layoffs in the economy. And we had a spike in October, and about 20% of those were attributed to AI. It wasn't even the majority. It was actually a relatively small number. It wasn't even the number one reason. But based on this, you got a wave of scare headlines that AI was wreaking havoc on U.S. jobs. Well, lo and behold, the November Challenger Gray report has come out, and it makes clear that October was an anomalous spike. The number fell by 53%, and only about 6,000 of the layoffs that were announced in November in the entire country were attributable to AI. This is only layoff, by the way. It doesn't include job creations, okay? So only 6,000. And if you look at the year to date in the Challenger Gray report, AI has only accounted for 4.7% of total layoffs. And that number is self-reported by CEOs, so my guess is it's inflated, because if you're a CEO, you'd rather blame AI for your company's non-performance rather than yourself. So that's, I think, a really important fact is regardless of what you want to claim will happen in the future, job loss has not happened yet.
By believing these lies, we are helping push a narrative that will take us to the next level of enslavement. So AI doesn't exist yet. What we're witnessing is just the next age of software development. People like to say that the internet has allowed them to find Christ, and they wouldn't even know about the little season if not for it. I empathize with that, but respectfully disagree. Without the absolute onslaught of technology we deal with on a daily basis, we would have more time for family and Bible study. I can't remember exactly who, it was either Madeline or JT, but they said in an interview a while back that their father was aware of all this stuff back in the 70s. The internet didn't help him discover the little season. Honest Bible study and a realistic view of the world did. Others have come forward in the comments and claimed the same. They knew this well before most of us were born. There's no reason we can't do the same. We need to just admit everything today is a deception created by Satan. Modern life is a sin and in stark contrast to the Father's goals, not try to find ways to justify it. And as we are the ones awake to the reality of the world, we have a responsibility to spread the message. even at the risk of rejection. God bless everyone. This video actually started out in a very different direction. I was researching early 20th century fiction and its connection to Little Season eschatology. However, seeing everything laid out revealed a possible timeline for the events that explain who we are and where we come from. We have so much evidence with the mud floods, orphan trains, the Industrial Revolution, political revolutions, missing history, scripture, you name it. Others have touched on it, but I've always wanted to combine it all into one simple unified theory. Hopefully this snowballs into something bigger and we finally reach a consensus. I've always been partial to the idea proposed by Madeline from Leaving Babylon, Jason Jack, and others that the Little Season began in 1776. It's actually frightening being only a month away from the 250-year anniversary, and I hope it's much later. People definitely aren't ready yet. But it seems reasonable that it would be somewhere around this time. Just keep in mind that this isn't like my usual videos dealing with current events where there's a paper trail to the corruption. This is a completely speculative opinion based on a comprehensive list of what little historical evidence we have. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you already reached the same conclusion. It seems fairly obvious once you start looking into it. Feel free to dispute it, and if you have a better theory, definitely share it. Hopefully, all of us working together can figure this thing out. So let's do this chronologically. There were two types of people during the Millennial Kingdom. First, we have the glorified saints whose resurrected immortal bodies allowed them to reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Well, actually forever. They were given everlasting life. This includes the Old Testament saints who were resurrected at the second coming, the church age believers who were resurrected at the rapture, and the martyred tribulation believers who came to life and also reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. I believe this category of humans with glorified bodies to be giants, as evidenced by the buildings they left behind. They do not seem to suffer everyday bodily functions and earthly temptations. Don't get too excited, though, because they do not marry or reproduce, so we definitely don't descend from them. The rest were the mortal humans of the day and their offspring. Those who survived tribulation and gathered back to Israel, as well as the sheep from the sheep and goats judgment in Matthew 25:31-46. These mortal humans married, had children, and also died. Isaiah 65:20-25 shows that while things were certainly better, the sheep were still mortal, as were their offspring. You're probably thinking we descend from these people. Possibly, but there's so much more evidence that has led me to think that while these descendants might exist on the earth today, they are not our ancestors, at least not for the bulk of us. I even considered the possibility that those of us who can trace our ancestry way back might descend from these people while most of us hit a wall around 1800. But the problem with this is that genetically we are mostly all the same, and Revelation doesn't mention the extended lifespans of the mortals reverting back at the end of the 1,000 years. That and some of the Ancestry.com data going back that far might be completely fabricated. While most mortals living under the reign of Christ were still good, just like all of their ancestors who survived tribulation and entered the Millennial Kingdom, there is a lot of evidence that many were wicked, as everyone has free will, so it makes sense that some of them to make sure the entire world population will fight in your army. An army that will be like the sands of the seas as it's described in Revelation 20. We all know it can't last, the trajectory we are currently traveling as a species, socially, economically, or spiritually. I don't believe we are quite at the end of the Little Season, but we are definitely entering the final act. And those in control have generously offered up their guide for it, with their actions in the present and their words and legislation for the future. They are stealing our humanity now in order to usher in AI, smart cities, and complete and total oppression in just a few short years. We are on the verge of complete and total economic collapse. Asset prices are through the roof while jobs are nowhere to be found and worsening by the day. The worst possible combination for 99% of the population. My second video on banking and finance goes into much more detail on the topic, so feel free to watch that one for supplemental information. It's no surprise to anyone to say that government has completely let us down in recent decades. Gone are the days of propping up the middle class and making sacrifices to ensure that future generations flourish. Quite the opposite. Those in control could not make it any more clear that we are nearing the end of an empire, and they're milking it for everything it's worth, creating a wealth gap that will certainly outpace Venezuela soon. The famous quote, "The last official act of any government is to loot the treasury," describes our current economic situation perfectly. America, as well as most of Europe, has been known for their strong middle class for several generations. That is now a thing of the past due to the nationalization of all assets. And while these policies have benefited an entire generation, the boomers, they have ensured poverty for subsequent generations, and it gets worse with each one. Borrowing from future generations not to ensure survival, but to make themselves filthy, stinking rich is egregious. There were opportunities after the great financial crisis of 2009 to allow fraudulent and negligent corporations and financial centers to collapse organically. But in a surprising twist, they were bailed out, and still are to this day. By all metrics, we've been in a massive recession since then, but they just print unprecedented amounts of money to skew the data. The problem with this is twofold. First, the path printed money takes is directly into the pockets of billionaires. And second, this money is not inflated until the scraps trickle down to us. This is called the Cantillon effect, which means that in addition to wages not keeping up with inflation, the billionaires who are given all this money without doing any work get to spend it at a much higher valuation, further increasing the wealth gap. The problem is this financial plan of printing money into oblivion can't last. In addition, they use many other government and financial tools to artificially prop up asset prices so that future generations will never be able to afford to purchase houses, stocks, and various other financial products necessary to obtain generational wealth. There is only one reason why any government would deliberately sabotage the future and ultimately themselves like this. And it's because they know it's over. And before it all collapses, they want to convert as much of this worthless fiat into tangible assets so that the rest of us won't own anything. In the last few years, they've been doing this under the guise of private equity, now buying up massive tracts of land, entire neighborhoods, even utilities. Older generations who inherited their parents' land love selling it to private equity instead of passing it on to their children, which would go a long way towards getting us out of this mess. Increasing the wealth gap has been shown to cause significant devastation on populations, including irreversible poverty and illness. Going back as recently as the early 70s, minimum wage was equivalent to $65 or $70 an hour today in most states, meaning that two people working 40 hours a week at the lowest wages could afford to buy a home. Today, those same two people could barely afford rent. And to be honest, it wasn't all that great back then either, because the father did not intend for us to be debt slaves for 30 years. Which is why he opposed interest-bearing loans, all to live in a meager home just to have some chance of acquiring a tiny amount of wealth to pass on to our children before we die. Well, they've upped it again, and now buying a median-priced home is nearly impossible for younger generations due to asset manipulation. The free market is gone, and the government is working with the Fed and private equity to make sure most young people are renters for life. Fannie and Freddie have been bailing out 7 million mortgage holders since 2020, and another 8 million have avoided foreclosure due to the mortgage forgiveness due to the weakening job market, just to prevent housing prices dropping and younger generations being able to afford them. In addition, the Fed holds all mortgage-backed securities and will never sell, so housing prices won't collapse and will certainly not return to affordable levels before the end, especially with the other tricks they have up their sleeves in the way of pending legislation, which I'll talk about later in this video. A lot of people think it would be economically devastating if there was a housing crash, but that couldn't be further from the truth. You may receive less for the house you're selling, but you'd also be paying less for the next house you're buying. It's a wash. The only reason to keep prices artificially propped up is to ensure younger generations are perpetual renters, which is necessary to carry out their plans for complete totalitarianism. And it gets worse. Our own government is now socializing losses and privatizing profits. It's quite clear that those in power, those who serve in the synagogue of Satan, are greedy. But it's not just that they want our money and possessions. They want complete control of us physically and spiritually as well, as they will need us for the final battle. Luckily, we already know it won't be enough, but millions will suffer in its wake. Also covered in my second video on banking and finance is equities, commodities, and really any asset you might be interested in investing in. They too are artificially inflated to make sure younger generations, the generations they need to have total control of in the end, cannot ever experience generational wealth. Some people say that younger generations will inherit the wealth after the boomers pass on, but there's two problems with that theory. One, according to many surveys and interviews with financial planners, they plan to spend most of it in their twilight years. And two, there is legislation pending in the name of green energy that will make home ownership expenses outright impossible for all but the super rich. The end of generational wealth has already begun. Millennials and especially Gen Z are experiencing it right now. They are the most educated and least employed generation to date. So they get to see firsthand how it's impossible to stay ahead of debt and inflation that outpaces wages in the modern world. Even the ones who have a job that matches their education aren't paid enough to be considered middle class by boomer standards. They are awake. They know that they have no chance of ever retiring if they just play it safe like previous generations did. So what do? They gamble like degenerates. They invest in crypto ETFs with 100x leverage in hopes of maybe someday being able to afford a home, support a family, or retire. To those of us who aren't living paycheck to paycheck, it seems ridiculous and irresponsible. But they know poverty is the only reality for playing it safe. Excessive risk really is their only chance, and on margin to boot. However, this can lead to devastating losses, as we just saw 3 weeks ago. A flash crash in the crypto market caused some of these kids to lose everything. Rags to riches to rags again. They went from despair to hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, then right back to nothing. Nearly 3,000 kids in their 20s killed themselves that night. We are witnessing the financial collapse of the future right before our eyes, and guess what? The government, media, and financial institutions keep pumping asset prices to oblivion while creating hyperinflation that the other 99% of the population will suffer, and no one questions it. The other evidence of end times is much more clear. I don't think I need to tell anyone that we have a complete moral breakdown of society. Reminds me of an even worse version of the Weimar Republic before the Nazis took over. Drugs, prostitution, divorce, sexual perversion, bodily mutilation, civil unrest, and runaway inflation. And what always follows complete moral breakdown? Societal collapse. It's the end of the American dream and the beginning of you will own nothing and be happy. But what we're approaching is not the next world war, it's the Bolshevik Revolution. It's going to be the end of life on Earth for hundreds of millions of Christians. The direction the world has been heading only has one conclusion, and it's exactly what we've been told for years. All nations combined into essentially a one-world government with the goal of complete control of all life. It's not hard to find. They tell us what they're doing. The WEF and the UN have released detailed plans for global domination, as they put it. The groundwork is complete. They have already made us slaves by the biblical definition. They already control the 5 institutions that allow them to manipulate the worldwide population: government, banking, media, education, and medicine. They have most people under their spell. We have been tricked into believing that we have political power through voting, but the two-party system ensures one of their own will always win every election. We think we have a legitimate financial system despite every dollar printed being tied to debt that we have to pay to a private bank in the form of income tax. It's preposterous. Most believe media and education is reputable and that pharmaceuticals are legitimate medicine. It's true, the vast majority of the population has been completely deceived and will follow their satanic overlords to their graves. But they don't have all of us, not quite yet. What they do have is a plan that they began implementing years ago and is now on the verge of maturing. Complete and total control of all mankind. The WEF and UN have been pumping Agenda 2030 for years, just an evolved version of Agenda 21, but now we've moved on from discussion to implementation. Let's start with biometric IDs. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the WEF, says that we need to have a fusion of our biological and our digital identities. Sounds like a mouthful, but what that means is that they are introducing a way to connect our social and medical lives with our ability to eat, go to the store, use the internet, earn an income, live. It's directly related to CBDCs, social credit scores, and it requires complete allegiance just to exist. Participation is not optional. Looks like you didn't get your 15th long metal spike filled with poison injected into your bloodstream last week, so your finances have been blocked. Complete and total surveillance in everything we do, tracking our carbon footprint, our political and religious opinions, everything we buy. The list is endless. Don't think Trump is going to save us either. Real ID began under his administration, and we now have to have one just to fly in a plane. The next step is full implementation of biometric digital ID, which is happening now in the UK, Australia, and Switzerland, among others. We've already seen what happens to people who spread the truth, or as they like to call it, misinformation. Jobs are disappearing already, and most of the rest will soon be replaced with AI. They are forcing us to become completely helpless so that we have no choice but to become completely reliant on them just for basic survival. Then they will change the narrative. This is where the happy part of you will own nothing and be happy comes in, and how they're going to easily be able to convert us all to the new system. I've covered fake jobs in previous videos and show that they have been replacing real workers with these fake jobs for several decades now. Almost all government, administrative, and corporate jobs are worthless. Those people don't actually do anything. We are becoming desensitized to doing nothing of import and accepting a paycheck for it. Whether or not real AI or AGI ever comes to fruition is irrelevant. You can read through the UN and WEF material to see they've already accepted it as the future of employment and governance. They will tell us that because of this amazing technology, we will now only have to work 20 hours a week, 30 weeks a year, because AI is so amazing. It's an easy sell. But the truth is those people never worked at all anyway, so they will be happy to keep receiving the same paycheck for a fraction of the hours of unnecessarily sitting at a desk. But only those people will be happy. The same ignorant slaves to the system we have today. The rest of us will have daily choices like speak the truth or eat. Dissenters will be dealt with. Don't believe me? There's a pact that now all 193 countries that participate in the United Nations has signed. What I have here isn't even the original, which was far more disturbing but has since been removed from their website after people started reposting it everywhere. It's been wiped off social media, and when you go to the original link, here's all you see. But even the one you can still get off the site tells you what they're up to. If you read through the UN's Pact for the Future, the first thing you'll notice is the use of the word global over and over again, especially referring to enforcement. And with all countries signing, they have it. Global to me sounds like all nations, Gog and Magog. But here's the kicker. They want it all run by AI. Trump is even promoting AI government and has already taken steps to begin the transition. Good luck leaving your 200 square foot apartment in the smart city to try to go on a wilderness walk on property owned by the collective, which by that time it all will be. Of course, AI will also replace many jobs, leaving us without bargaining chips for our basic human rights, and we will be forced to accept their UBI just to survive. But at what cost? They want to control all means of commerce by increasing the amount of central bank influence worldwide. As we all know, those who print the money control everything. But they're taking it a step further with digital currency, which will take away the ability for us to conduct private business. Every transaction will be recorded and graded under our social credit scores. And if they don't like something they see in our medical scans, our political or theological beliefs, something we bought, they can cut off access to our bank accounts in an instant. Housing may already seem out of reach for most of the younger generations today, but it's going to get much worse. The European Union has begun sending out letters to citizens stating that they will have to make significant upgrades in order to adhere to new green energy standards. Homes will need to be zero emissions in the near future. It's called the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Just like with everything else, when government gets power, they just lever that into further oppression. So already you have people expected to pay over €100,000 to adhere to these new standards. Now, picture America, where, let's be honest, most neighborhood homes built in the last 30 years will essentially be teardowns because of our pathetic building codes. They leak so much heat and air conditioning and are made of such leaky toxic materials that it will cost as much as the house itself to fix, which ultimately won't be worth it. If tiny little, well-insulated European homes are $100,000 to fix now, imagine ours here in America. Now imagine it when the next level of governance appears. In addition, they have already made significant headway into securing natural resources. Private equity is buying up utilities and farmland. How is that even possible? Our government allows private equity to buy utilities. Resources necessary for survival, just like housing, are now going to be priced out of the reach of most people. Other billionaires are buying land with water rights that can devastate their entire region, as we're seeing right now in the West. And then you have the AI scam. The stock market has priced in 90% of the world's GDP going to AI. And as of now, the pinnacle of its accomplishments are just some funny TikToks. It's an excuse to build massive data centers, potentially for AI use, but certainly to manage the massive amount of data the biometric IDs will require. And another benefit for them, the ridiculous amount of natural resources that they demand, like electricity and water. At this point, AI is still virtually useless, yet it's still predicted to use 12% of America's energy in just a couple of years. Imagine where we'll be in 5 years. The rural people will be forced to move into their smart cities just to have access to water and power. This will make the transition very easy for most of the population, having no home or land with access to water or power, even if we can afford it. Starving us into submission has worked for them in the past. Just look at the Bolshevik Revolution, which is clearly their model to deal with us now and through the end of this little season. Look how easily they accomplished the death of 50 million Christians. But they have laid so much more groundwork for their current mission, and it will be multitudes worse. It's not difficult to wipe out an entire group when they're all packed into tiny cities like sardines. It's just common sense. We know they want to control us with AI, or if the technology never gets there, the lie of the idea of AI running government. It really gets them off the hook for mass genocide in their eyes. But look, they flat out admit it, and between the technology itself powering robotic surveillance and computers to control our every move, the biometric and social media surveillance, CBDCs, the fact that they openly discuss AI governance, buying up all resources to keep them out of the reach of the working class, and absolutely no effort being made to increase our basic national infrastructure, there is really no other logical conclusion to arrive at other than totalitarianism. Well, a market crash would certainly help, at least if it was legitimate. Deliberately crashing stock prices like they did in 1929 to steal people's assets at bargain prices didn't work out so well for the rest of us. But if legitimate, it would at least give Gen Z and the millennials a fighting chance at avoiding this inevitable demise. But I'm way too cynical for that. We're just too close to the end. So what can we do to prevent this? First and foremost, put your faith in Christ. It will make this time much more difficult, but we have to stay true to our hearts. No matter how difficult, we cannot relent. We also need to avoid temptation, going forward more than ever. My 5th video on how to navigate the little season shows us just how difficult this time will be. But as long as we stay on the straight path, there is a glorious light at the end of the tunnel. We can't stop them unless we fight back as a group. But we won't. So even if some of us do it, it really won't matter. People as a rule won't make a single sacrifice in their earthly life to improve their spiritual or afterlife. I keep hearing people say that they're going to fight back. No, they won't. If that was the case, then they already would have done it. If people didn't fight back over income tax, literally going from not paying to paying 40% of their income to the Federal Reserve, back when it would have been easy to shut it down, then they certainly won't fight back now against a military force that we can't beat. They didn't fight back when the government took away our weapons. The Second Amendment clearly states that the people should be on par militarily with the government. It would have been easy 100 plus years ago when they started building advanced military weaponry to make sure we also had those rights. But no. In fact, there's been no legitimate effort to defend any of our rights guaranteed to us in our Bill of Rights. And now they're gone. Unfortunately, Revelation 20 isn't very specific about those of us who don't join Satan's army. It talks about the judgment of the dead, which does include everyone, but it doesn't say much about those of us who resisted. A depressing interpretation would be that those of us who choose not to fight against our Savior are part of the dead. And from all evidence we have, they will more than likely have the ability to seek us out and destroy us before assembling their massive army. Okay, I didn't think this video could get any darker, so I'll probably just end it here. I know it sounds pessimistic, but it's just truth. It's the most logical conclusion based on scripture and the evidence at hand. Please know that it ends well, though. Just place your heart and faith in Jesus Christ and try to make sure everyone else does too. God bless everyone.